During the Cold War, the United States prepared for nuclear war. Missiles, bombers, submarines. But there was another battlefield, one the public never knew existed. A battlefield where weapons were not machines, but minds. This is the story of how the U.S. government secretly asked an impossible question. Can the human mind be used as a weapon? By the early 1970s, fear defined American intelligence. The Soviet Union appeared unpredictable, aggressive, willing to experiment beyond ethical. Boundarius, intelligence reports began mentioning something strange. Not new missiles, not advanced aircraft, but psychic research. Claims that the Soviets were exploring telepathy, mind influence, remote perception. At first, American analysts dismissed it. Then more reports arrived, and fear replaced disbelief. According to CIA memorandums, Soviet scientists were allegedly researching ways to influence enemy decision-makers, extract information without interrogation, detect hidden military assets remotely. Whether these reports were true or exaggerated didn't matter. What mattered was one thing. If the Soviets believed it could work, they might make it work, and the United States could not afford to ignore that risk. Inside classified Pentagon meetings, an unthinkable idea was raised. What if consciousness itself could be studied? What if perception wasn't limited to the five senses? What if the mind could gather intelligence? Without physical presence, this wasn't science fiction to military planners. It was risk management. If there was even a 1% chance the enemy could do this, America needed to know. The government turned to scientists, not mystics, physicists, engineers, researchers already working with classified technology. Some were skeptical. Others quietly admitted something unsettling. Human perception was not fully understood, and where knowledge ends, experimentation begins. Small tests were approved. Off the books, low funding, low visibility, high secrecy. The project didn't have a name yet, but it had a purpose. The earliest tests were simple. Participants were asked to describe objects in another room, then another building, then another location entirely. Most failed. A few didn't. Some descriptions were uncomfortably accurate, enough to disturb researchers, enough to justify continuing. The results were inconsistent, but inconsistency didn't equal uselessness. In intelligence work, even partial success matters. If this research became public, it would cause panic. People would question free will, privacy, reality itself, so secrecy became non-negotiable. Funding was hidden inside other programs. Records were compartmentalized. Participants signed lifelong non-disclosure agreements. This wasn't about belief, it was about control. By the end of the decade, the U.S. government had crossed a line. They didn't know if psychic intelligence was real, but they knew something else. Ignoring it was more dangerous than exploring it. The project would soon receive a formal name, a secure location, and a mission that would change intelligence history forever. In intelligence work, fear does not come from certainty. It comes from the unknown. In the early 1970s, U.S. intelligence did not know exactly what the Soviet Union was doing, and that uncertainty terrified them. Because somewhere behind the Iron Curtain, something unusual appeared to be happening. CIA analysts began receiving translated Soviet scientific journals. Most were harmless, but some were not. They discussed human consciousness, bioenergetics, psychotronic influence, remote perception. Words that did not belong in military research, yet there they were funded, published, and expanding. To American intelligence, this raised a red flag. The Cold War was already an arms race, but this would be different. Missiles could be detected. Weapons could be counted. Psychic capabilities. Invisible, if the Soviets could influence minds, extract information, or disrupt decision-making, there would be no defense. This fear alone justified action, not belief, preparation. A classified briefing reached senior defense officials. It stated, even if such capabilities prove ineffective, failure to investigate would leave the United States vulnerable. This single sentence changed everything. It wasn't saying psychic warfare was real. It was saying ignoring it was unacceptable. And in intelligence culture, that is enough. Many scientists objected. They called the idea unscientific, embarrassing, dangerous to credibility. But intelligence agencies don't require certainty. They require advantage. The question was never, is it real? The question was, what if it is? And skeptics were sidelined. The funding was small, deliberately. It was buried inside unrelated defense research. No paper trail, no attention, no oversight. This was not a public science experiment. This was reconnaissance into the unknown, and now it was official. If word leaked, the damage would be severe. America would look desperate, unstable, irrational. Public trust would collapse, so secrecy became survival. The project would operate without recognition, without explanation, without accountability. By the mid-1970s, the decision had been made. The United States would not dismiss psychic warfare. It would investigate it, quietly, carefully, and with full military intent. The project would be given a name, a secure facility, and a mandate that shocked even those inside the system. Every secret program begins the same way. Quiet approval, careful wording, no public announcement. Project Stargate did not begin with a breakthrough. It began with a decision that the United States could no longer afford to ignore the unknown. Once funding was approved, the research needed structure. A code name was a sign not for meaning, but for misdirection. Project Stargate. The name revealed nothing. It raised no suspicion. It blended into the thousands of classified programs already operating, and that was the point. Surprisingly, Stargate was not initially controlled by the CIA. It was overseen by military intelligence. This was intentional. CIA programs attracted scrutiny, congressional oversight, historical exposure. Military research, experimental research, was easier to conceal. Stargate was placed in a compartment so small that even senior officials were unaware of its true purpose. The project needed isolation. Not underground bunkers, not secret islands, just distance. A location far from public view, yet close enough to major defense infrastructure. The chosen facilities were modest. No signs, no markings, no indication of extraordinary research. From the outside, Stargate looked like routine defense work. From the inside, it was something else entirely. Stargate did not recruit psychics from the street. It recruited people who showed unusual cognitive traits, not believers, not mystics. Analysts noticed some individuals consistently outperformed others in perception tasks. They didn't know why, but they didn't ignore it. Those individuals were quietly approached. Background checks followed. Secrecy agreements were signed, and once inside, there was no leaving with answers. Stargate followed strict rules. No public acknowledgement, no personal interpretation, no discussion outside secure rooms. Participants were instructed not to speculate, only to describe, only to report, only to comply. Emotion was considered contamination. Belief was considered dangerous. Targets were chosen at random, coordinates, photographs sealed in envelopes, locations unknown to participants. The task was simple. Describe what you perceive. Most sessions produced noise, but some produced clarity. And those moments unsettled everyone in the room, because the descriptions didn't feel guessed. They felt observed. By the end of its first year, Stargate had crossed a point of no return. Not because it had proven psychic warfare was real, but because it had proven something worse. It could not be dismissed. The results were unpredictable, but not meaningless. And intelligence agencies never abandon a tool that might work. Project Stargate was not built on magic. It was built on procedure, a method so simple it felt ridiculous, and so disturbing it refused to go away. They called it remote viewing. And once it began, intelligence agencies could not ignore what they were seeing. Remote viewing was not clairvoyance, at least not officially. Participants were not told to imagine. They were instructed to observe. No names, no context, no expectations, just coordinates. The idea was simple. If consciousness could access information beyond the senses, it would do so best without interference. Sessions were conducted under strict conditions. Viewers sat in plain rooms, no windows, no clocks, no distractions. An interviewer guided the session, carefully avoiding leading questions. Everything was recorded, every word, every pause, every hesitation. This wasn't mysticism. It was data collection. Most sessions produced vague impressions, shapes, textures, temperature, but occasionally something different happened. Participants described water near industrial structures, metallic objects hidden underground, long corridors, circular buildings, details that were later confirmed. Not perfectly, but closely enough to disturb skeptics. Critics focused on inaccuracies. Supporters focused on trends. Remote viewing didn't need to be perfect. It only needed to provide useful hints. In intelligence work, even partial insight can change decisions. And Stargate was starting to do that. Some sessions crossed a line. Viewers described moving objects before satellites confirmed them, facilities not yet publicly known, structures later verified by reconnaissance. The data was inconsistent. But it wasn't random, and randomness is easy to dismiss. Pattern is not. Scientists argued. Commanders listened. Analysts debated whether results came from coincidence, subconscious inference, or something else entirely. No one could agree, but no one could explain everything away either, which meant the program continued. By the end of this phase, Stargate had discovered something unsettling. Not that remote viewing was reliable, but that it sometimes worked, and in military intelligence, sometimes is enough to justify secrecy, funding, and expansion. Project Stargate was not a machine, it was people. Men and women asked to do something no one could fully explain, under conditions where failure was expected and success was feared. They were never called psychics. Inside the program, they had another name. Viewers Stargate did not recruit believers. It recruited anomalies. People who, during testing, consistently noticed details others missed. Some had military backgrounds, some were civilians, some had no idea why they were selected. They were told only this: you may be able to perceive information in ways we can't yet understand. No promises, no explanations, just secrecy. Training was not mystical, it was rigid. Viewers were taught to suppress imagination, avoid emotional interpretation, describe sensations without meaning. They were warned. The mind wants to guess. Guessing ruins everything. Sessions were exhausting. Mental fatigue was common. Headaches were routine. Doubt was constant. Every session carried weight. Viewers knew their work could influence real operations, but they were never told outcomes. No feedback, no validation, no closure. This was intentional. Confirmation created bias. Uncertainty maintained neutrality, and neutrality was essential. Occasionally, a viewer would describe something with shocking clarity: a structure, a location, a hidden detail. Analysts would quietly leave the room. No reactions, no expressions. Viewers were not allowed to know if they were correct, but the silence was telling. Over time, some viewers began to struggle. Sleep disturbances, anxiety, disconnection from reality. Being asked to perceive without understanding takes a toll. Some questioned their sanity. Others questioned reality itself. A few left the program, most stayed. Why continue? Patriotism, curiosity, responsibility. They believed their work mattered, even if it was never acknowledged, even if it was never explained. They were serving their country in a way no one would ever know. The viewers were never celebrated. They were never recognized. They were tools used carefully, quietly, and selectively. But tools leave marks. And as Stargate expanded, the missions grew more serious. In the next hour, we examine the cases that shook intelligence agencies, the missions that made skeptics uneasy. Most Stargate sessions ended quietly. Notes filed, recordings archived, no reaction. But a few sessions changed the mood of the room, not because they were dramatic, but because they were disturbingly precise. Stargate analysts expected failure. They planned for it. Remote viewing was never trusted blindly. Every result was compared against known intelligence. Most sessions added nothing, but some added too much. In one documented session, a viewer was given coordinates no context. They described a large industrial site, cold climate, heavy machinery, structures beneath the surface. Satellite imagery later revealed a Soviet military installation under construction. The viewer did not name it. They did not describe its purpose, but the layout matched too closely. In another case, Stargate was asked to assist in locating a missing military aircraft. The viewer described a remote area, mountainous terrain, snow cover. Search teams later confirmed wreckage in a region matching the description. Not exact, but close enough to redirect resources. And that mattered. Success was a problem. If remote viewing worked even occasionally, it raised terrifying questions. Was consciousness non-local? Could information exist without physical transfer? Could enemies use this too? The implications extended far beyond intelligence. They challenged physics. Some officials grew uneasy, not because Stargate failed, but because it couldn't be explained. Unexplainable tools create instability. You can't control what you don't understand. And intelligence agencies depend on control. Despite doubts, Stargate remained operational, because when conventional intelligence stalled, Stargate offered something else, a different angle, a last resort. And in high-stakes situations, last resorts matter. By this point, Stargate had crossed another invisible boundary. It was no longer just an experiment, it was an operational asset, used cautiously, quietly, reluctantly. Every secret program faces an enemy. Sometimes it's not a foreign power, sometimes it's the people inside the room. By the late 1980s, Project Stargate was no longer fighting disbelief from the outside, it was fighting itself. Scientists versus intelligence officers. Two groups now shared the same space. Scientists wanted replicable results, statistical proof, controlled conclusions. Intelligence officers wanted anything useful, any edge, any insight. These goals did not align. Scientists asked, "Why does this work?" Intelligence asked, "Does this help?" The tension was constant. The problem of inconsistency, remote viewing did not behave like a weapon. It could not be aimed, it could not be scheduled, it could not be guaranteed. Some days, results were compelling. Other days, nothing. To scientists, this meant failure. To intelligence officers, it meant uncertainty, but not uselessness. Internal reviews and quiet doubts. Periodic reviews were conducted. Data was reanalyzed, sessions were scored, statistics were debated. Some reports concluded, results exceed chance. Others concluded, no actionable reliability. Both were true, and that contradiction haunted the program. The fear of embarrassment. There was another danger, exposure. If Stargate became public, it could damage credibility, not just of the program, but of the agencies involved. In Washington, embarrassment is not cosmetic, it's career-ending. This fear began to outweigh curiosity. Viewers caught in the middle. The viewers felt the shift. Sessions became less frequent. Feedback vanished entirely. Support structures eroded. Some viewers reported feeling disposable. They had given years of their lives. To something now being quietly questioned, morale dropped. Trust eroded. The question no one wanted to ask. At some point, leadership faced an uncomfortable truth. Even if Stargate worked occasionally, was it worth the cost? Not financial cost, reputational cost, philosophical cost. The cost of admitting reality might be stranger than expected, the beginning of the end. By the early 1990s, the internal war had reached its peak. Supporters were losing influence. Skeptics were gaining ground. The question was no longer, does it work? It was, can we afford to keep this? In the next hour, the answer arrives. Files open, documents surface, and Project Stargate finally enters the public record. For nearly 2 decades, Project Stargate existed in silence. No headlines, no public debate, no accountability. Then, in the mid-1990s, something unexpected happened. The files began to open. By the early 1990s, Cold War priorities were collapsing. The Soviet Union was gone. Budgets were shrinking. Old programs were being reevaluated. Project Stargate no longer looked like a strategic asset. It looked like a liability. Leadership made a quiet decision. End the program, release selected records, control the narrative. When documents were released, they confirmed something critical. Stargate was real. It was funded. It was staffed. It was operational. Remote viewing was not speculation. It was documented practice. Session transcripts, evaluation reports, internal memos. The public reaction was confusion, not outrage, not fear, confusion. The timing mattered. The 1990s were filled with distractions. Economic change, political scandal, emerging internet culture. Psychic spies felt absurd, too strange to process seriously. Media coverage was brief. Late-night jokes followed, and the story faded, which may have been the plan all along. Not everything was released. Some documents were heavily redacted, withheld entirely, destroyed years earlier. Details about specific missions, identities of certain personnel, evaluation methods. The public saw the outline, not the substance. An external review was commissioned. Its conclusion was carefully worded. Remote viewing did not provide actionable intelligence on a consistent basis. This statement ended Stargate officially, but it didn't say the phenomenon was impossible, only unreliable. That distinction matters. Former participants were divided. Some felt relief, some felt betrayed, some felt erased. Years of work reduced to a footnote. A program acknowledged but dismissed. For many, the hardest part wasn't secrecy. It was dismissal. Project Stargate was now public. But it wasn't understood. It existed in an uncomfortable space, too real to deny, too strange to accept, and that left one final question hanging in the air. If the government admitted it once explored psychic intelligence, what would stop it from doing so again, with better technology? Officially, Project Stargate ended in 1995. Files were closed, funding stopped, personnel moved on. But history shows that government programs rarely disappear. They transform, and that raises a troubling question. Did Stargate truly end? Or did it simply change form? When programs are successful, they expand. When they fail, they are buried. But when programs are uncertain, they are absorbed. Methods are separated from names. Research is fragmented. Funding becomes indirect. Stargate may not exist on paper anymore, but its ideas could live on elsewhere. In the decades since Stargate ended, science has advanced rapidly. Today, research openly explores brain-computer interfaces, neural mapping, cognitive enhancement, nonverbal communication. What once sounded paranormal now appears in peer-reviewed journals, not as psychic phenomena, as neuroscience. The U.S. military continues to invest heavily in understanding cognition. Focus areas include faster decision-making, stress resistance, situational awareness. These goals mirror Stargate's original intent. The language has changed. The objective has not. Modern defense research often occurs outside government labs, private companies, university partnerships, black-budget projects. This structure provides insulation. If something controversial exists today, it wouldn't look like Stargate, and that's the point. If research touches consciousness, perception, or influence, transparency becomes dangerous. Public fear, ethical backlash, political fallout, silence becomes policy, and silence doesn't require deception, just absence. Some former Stargate personnel believe the work continues, not identically, but philosophically. They don't claim psychic spies still exist. They claim the question Stargate asked was never answered. And unanswered questions don't stay buried. Project Stargate officially ended. That much is true, but the curiosity it sparked never did. And in a world driven by information, speed, and advantage, the mind remains the most powerful tool of all. For nearly 30 years, Project Stargate remained hidden from the world. Now, after decades of declassification, interviews, and research, the story is finally known. But knowing is not the same as understanding. Some questions remain unanswered. Some truths remain uncomfortable, and some mysteries may never end. Project Stargate changed how the U.S. approached intelligence. It proved that even the human mind could be treated as a potential tool or a weapon. Government documents show psychic observation can sometimes produce actionable information. Even low-probability successes justify continued exploration. Secrecy is easier than explanation. Its legacy is not in fame or glory, but in method and mindset. Today, researchers analyze Stargate files with new tools. Data analytics, statistical modeling, neuroscience research. Some sessions once dismissed as coincidence now appear far more consistent than initially believed. Historians argue remote viewing may have been real, even if poorly understood. And modern military programs, though renamed, still explore human potential in ways Stargate pioneered. Analysts have debated Stargate for decades. Coincidence theory, results were random. Analysts saw patterns where none existed. Psychological theory, viewers unconsciously inferred information based on subtle cues. Parapsychology theory, consciousness can access information beyond the senses. Official documents never fully endorse any theory. But internal memos reveal that some officers quietly leaned toward the third. Stargate raises uncomfortable questions. Should the government experiment with human cognition at extreme levels? What are the limits of intelligence gathering? Can the line between science and espionage blur too far? Some participants claim the ethical line was crossed. Others argue national security justified every step. The debate continues today. Stargate's official closure does not equal finality. Black-budget programs, private contractors, and modern neuroscience may carry on the same mission. If intelligence agencies once explored psychic potential, why would they stop? The unanswered question, what is still happening behind closed doors? Project Stargate teaches us several lessons. The human mind is far more mysterious than assumed. Governments act on even partial possibilities when security is at stake. Secrecy often preserves programs longer than public awareness would allow. History is rarely complete. What we know is only the surface. These lessons resonate far beyond intelligence work. Project Stargate is over, officially, but its shadow remains. The idea that consciousness may reach further than the senses, that information might exist beyond perception, that secrecy can hide both truth and consequence. These are not just historical curiosities, they are warnings. And they leave us with one final question. If it worked once, why would they ever stop?